These are players you should try to snag in your leagues this week, especially if you're starting to make playoff pushes, because these are guys with high upside that are available in most leagues that you should be trying to go and get. Let's start with Xavier Legette. And you've seen Xavier Legette in the last couple weeks actually performing. He's had 13.5 and 14 points in each of the last 2 weeks, respectively. And a lot of people are going to point to Xavier Legette's production and say, well, this is going to be touchdown dependent, right? You look at the games where he hasn't scored a touchdown this year: 2 points, 1 point, 6 points, 0 points, and 7 points. In the games where he has scored a touchdown: 19.5 points, 11 points, 13.5 points, and 14 points. Pretty clear difference there when he's scoring a touchdown versus when he's not, right? There is something that I do think we should take into account here, and that thing is going to be me blindly chasing targets, because with Xavier Legette, the other thing you've seen is his usage go up. When you're looking at the snap counts for this last week for the Carolina Panthers, David Moore was actually the leading wide receiver in terms of snaps, but he was pretty much tied with Xavier Legette. They had 46 and 44. They ran the same amount of routes, and Legette had more targets. Legette led the team in targets by 1 over JT Sanders, who also could be a decent waiver pickup, by the way, if you're in a deeper league and you need a tight end pickup, because he's shown some flashes recently. But a lot of people last week were picking up Jalen Coker. I don't know. I'm going to check what his rostership percentage is. Coker's only 17% on Sleeper. Legette is going to be 48%. So there's going to be about half of Sleeper leagues and a little bit more of ESPN and Yahoo leagues where Xavier Legette is available. I do think he's worth a pickup because, again, going back to the targets, 7 targets in the first week, but then 3 and then 10 targets against Cincinnati where he did get his touchdown. You've seen the touchdowns come in his highest targeted games this year, outside of week 1 being the exception. Now, the last couple games, starting in week 5, 1, 4, and 3 targets in the last 2 games, 7 and 6 targets. If he can get 6, 7, 8 targets a game, I think he's going to be a 10 to 14 point per game, probably more like 10 to 12 point per game guy pretty consistently the rest of the season, and that makes him flexible. Yeah. I think regardless of how you look at this, there is plenty of opportunity in that offense, and now that's showing without Quinton Johnson there going to the Ravens. Probably not even going to do much on the Ravens, but with Xavier Legette, to me, he is also a rookie. He's going to be getting better as the season goes on, and I think you've already seen that. I think you've seen the team trust him more, but I mean, 90% of the 11 personnel snaps. He is on the field, and on the field means more targets, and more targets means more production and higher touchdown upside, which is what you've seen kind of define his production. And so I do think he's worth picking up off of waivers. In terms of what I would spend, look, at this point in the season, you're not really going to get a ton of good waiver. I mean, of what you have left, consider a good amount of it on Xavier Legette, because I think he's the #1 waiver option for us this week. I think, 10 to 15% of your total fab would be appropriate for Xavier Legette, just because, like I said, the waivers are absolutely dead this week for the most part. These are all guys that are kind of, rostered in some leagues and not. So he's a pretty good pickup. He's a pretty good option for your fantasy team.
I think Demarcus Robinson has become very interesting as well, which has come to be a pretty big surprise with Puka coming back healthy. Obviously, you're going to take week 9 and his production with a grain of salt, because Puka did get ejected from that game. I think like at the very beginning of the second half, and a lot of Robinson's production came towards the end of that game, and obviously that big play in overtime where he got the game-winning touchdown. He has had 2 games of 2 straight touchdowns now, or 2 straight games of 2 touchdowns. Minnesota, he had 3 targets, 2 receptions, 35 yards, and 2 touchdowns. You're like, okay, not that great. We know that's not sustainable. He's not going to be a hot pickup. Then you've got the Seattle game, 27 points, 9 targets, 6 receptions, 94 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Very similar to Xavier Legette, where I think the touchdown upside for Demarcus Robinson is a little more legitimate than people, including us, gave him credit for, with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua both coming back healthy here. And you're looking at his snaps this week. Puka obviously going to have less because of the ejection, but Demarcus Robinson well above guys like Tyler Johnson and Tutu Atwell. You would expect guys like Tyler Johnson, Tutu Atwell, when Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua were coming out or were out earlier this season, all those guys just kind of split those snaps and those opportunities all day. Demarcus Robinson has really taken the role away from those other guys as the objective third option in that offense. And I think with everyone being so worried and so concerned about Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua as the top options there, that has opened up the field and opened up opportunity for Demarcus Robinson, specifically in the red area, in the red zone, where it matters the most when you don't defensively want to allow touchdowns for the Rams and for Cooper Kupp and Puka to screw you, or Kyron Williams for that matter. The next guy up is Demarcus Robinson. He's the guy that is going to be left on an island with a potential mismatch with the third corner, with a man-on-man situation where you've got guys doubling Puka, got guys doubling Cooper Kupp, got the box stacked for Kyron Williams to not allow him to push the ball into the end zone. I just mentioned 3 different reasons for why on that offense, for why Demarcus Robinson is a decent waiver pickup this week, and why it's not going to cost much to get him, really. And I think if you've got the waiver spot, or not the waiver spot, if you've got the bench spot, if you have the flexibility to go pick him up, I think it's worth it, because you've got a lot of bye weeks coming up for a lot of important offenses that this is crunch time, where you can't afford to lose very many games if you're on the fringe of the playoffs at the moment. And Demarcus Robinson could be one of the reasons that you could salvage a week where you've got a lot of bye weeks that you're suffering from. So a very curious case with Demarcus. We're not going to project that he's going to get multiple touchdowns every single week, especially with Puka and Cooper Kupp being at full health. But keep this in mind. You might get a lucky week here and there, kind of like Xavier Legette.
Let's pivot now to Quinton Johnson. I personally can't hardly talk about this without crying. And I know it's just Quinton Johnson, but I dropped him in the flock league in order to pick up a defense since my Steelers were on a bye this week to beat Nathan. And he immediately got picked up, and of course he went for 22 points. Like, it makes me so, I did not want to drop him. I didn't really want to drop him at all. I tried to make a trade all week so I could get an extra roster spot, and now he's on somebody else's team. He's on one of the devs' teams, so that's fantastic. He did have 5 targets in this game, which is season high is 6. The problem with Quinton Johnson really is, number one, he's in an offense where they're clearly run first, and the passing volume has not really been sufficient to support almost any wide receiver in that offense from a fantasy football perspective, outside of Ladd McConkey, who's the wide receiver 19 on the year, which I thought was kind of crazy. I kind of did a double take when I saw that.
That is crazy.
Isn't that? He's pretty good, even with the bye week. So with Johnson, I mean, obviously he's had games where he's had 2 points, 5 points, 6 points, and then in the games where he scored touchdowns, 22, 12, and 22. So you're seeing another touchdown dependent, and actually particularly long touchdown dependent. I think in the Carolina game he had a long touchdown, and then in the Pittsburgh game I think his touchdown was like 20 or 30 yards if I remember right. But regardless, this is somebody that is going to be more touchdown dependent than somebody when you're targeting on waivers, say Ray McCloud, Demario Douglas, somebody like that. You're going to see a higher target volume. I don't think he's going to see him get more targets than 4 to 5 targets a year, and that's going to make him more boom bust. But he definitely would be interesting to put in your starting lineups if something were to happen to any of Ladd McConkey, or if you see the Chargers make a concerted effort to actually throw the ball more. Again, I don't think that you're going to spend a ton on Quinton Johnson, but I do think he's definitely worth rostering. In terms of his opportunity, he's getting less snaps than Ladd McConkey because he's not on the field for all the 12 personnel stuff, and he's running less routes, but he is, again, getting 5 targets. He did get a carry, which doesn't really matter for his fantasy production because he's not really turning that into anything. But we'll see. The one thing to keep in mind with Quinton Johnson is DJ Chark, who was activated off of IR and is now nearing a return to play. He could play a pretty similar role in that offense as Quinton Johnson, and it could cut into Quinton Johnson's playing time. And again, with somebody who's not getting a lot of targets, playing time is going to be really important. So if he does come back and have any impact on his playing time, I think that would be a red flag. But for now, like I said, I think he's worth rostering. I think you should go try to get him in your leagues if he's available. I think his rostership percentage right now is at 28%. I think that should be closer to 65, 70% in sleeper leagues right now, just because of the upside he does possess in an offense that has looked better passing the ball recently.
I think Ray McCloud has become a legitimate option that you're going to want to consider coming off of waivers here. He had a nice 12.5-point game in PPR formats this week. Only 3 targets, 3 receptions, 28 yards. He was able to haul in a touchdown. He has shown in weeks past that he can get 5 to 7, even 9 targets. He had 5 targets in week 2 against Philly, 7 targets apiece in week 1 against Pittsburgh, and week 4 against New Orleans, and then 9 targets against Tampa Bay. He's had some productive weeks here and there, nothing crazy, but this is definitely going to be an insurance play. If Drake London misses a week or 2, they did announce that it's a hit pointer. If he misses this week potentially, then Ray McCloud is the next man up. And I will tell you what, man, we were pretty low on Kyle Pitts and his situation. We've told you to sell him this week. And even with Drake London missing a majority of that game, his snaps did not go up. He had 31 snaps to Darnell Mooney's 57, to McCloud's 52, to Kadarrell Hodges' 46. That is pathetic. Like that is laughably bad for a guy that you expected to be a potential league winner, not getting near the opportunity that you expected for Kyle Pitts. I'm going and I'm investing in Ray McCloud this week. Again, insurance play. If Drake London doesn't play, you're considering flexing him if you've got some bye weeks that you're worried about. If you own Drake London, he's not a bad option this week. Kirk Cousins and his volume is absolutely no joke. I think all of the production that you thought was possible for every one of those assets in that offense has really come true with the amount of passing volume that Kirk Cousins provides in a week in and week out basis.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. It's going to be more of a short term thing. London is day to day. He might play this week, honestly, but if he doesn't, he could be a plug option for next week. Taysom Hill, I think, could also be a plug option. And the main reason that we actually don't have Taysom Hill as a little bit of a higher priority here is because they just fired Dennis Allen. And so you really don't know what the offense, what the team is going to look like for the rest of the year. This was really the first time that you've seen Taysom Hill get really involved in the passing game in terms of receiving against Carolina. He had 5 targets, 4 receptions for 41 yards. You also saw him running the ball, right? He had, I think, 5 carries, 19 yards and a touchdown. He also threw a pass. It was incomplete. So you could see, though, the Saints were actively funneling their offense through him through all 3 facets of the game. And that's what you want to see with Taysom Hill in order to be comfortable plugging him into your tight end spot. Because when he is being used like that, he is kind of a cheat code in your tight end spot for fantasy football. The problem with Taysom Hill, obviously, he missed, 3 games there after having 14 points in the Atlanta game. The problem with Taysom Hill is he's extremely hit or miss. Like going back to last season, 11 points, 0 points, 1 point, 15 points, 8 points, 4 points, 20 points, 22, 16, 12, and then 3. So, like, I mean, you never know when the Saints are going to be like, let's use him now, and now let's not. And again, what makes this even more risky now is the fact that they have a new head coach, and actually probably acting interim head coach, I'd assume, and it just happened. But this is one where in a rougher tight end landscape that has looked better over the last couple weeks. Taysom Hill, though, he could be a cheat code if he continues to be used like this. It also might be worth, and I'm not probably spending much on Taysom Hill at all, but it probably is worth wavering him if you have an extra roster spot. For the same reason, because they do have a new head coach, and because that offense may look, I mean, even marginally different. I honestly would expect it to look more or less the same. And so if it looks anything like it did last week, then you're going to see Taysom Hill be heavily involved, and he could end up being, like I said, somebody in your tight end spot that could be really good for you rest of the season from a fantasy production standpoint. So Taysom is definitely worth a look on the waiver wire. I wouldn't spend much on him, if at all, but if you have an extra roster spot, I think it's worth going out there and taking a shot on somebody who has a ton of upside for the fantasy football playoffs.
Yep. Ray Davis has not entirely disappeared since James Cook came back from that injury after week 6. I do want to note his production since that Jets game: 11 points, 2 points, and 17 points to James Cook's 9, 28, and 11 points. So Ray Davis has actually outproduced James Cook in 2 of the 3 weeks since he's been back healthy. Now, I wouldn't let that fool you necessarily, because number one, Ray Davis is objectively touchdown dependent because his opportunity is still so limited. James Cook is the best option in that offense at the running back position. As long as he's healthy, he will be the top option there. When you're looking at the receiving snaps as well, James Cook had 36 snaps in the passing game, so Ray Davis only getting 9. So I think on paper, if you're just reading the box score and you're reading all these points, you're like, okay, this is kind of a concern for James Cook. This actually might merit James Cook being a low-key buy. But with Ray Davis, he's definitely a guy that's rosterable. Number one, he's a great insurance play. You saw what he was capable of doing when James Cook went down. And if you need to take a shot on a last-second flex play due to injury or buys, again, this is Week 10 waivers. We got a lot of injuries going on. We got more bye weeks coming up. Ray Davis is a legitimate flex play that you can be comfortable is capable of putting up 15 points any given week. He is very explosive when he touches the ball. He does not need that many opportunities to have touchdown upside, and he is getting opportunities in the red zone as well. So keep an eye on Ray Davis over the next couple of weeks. Hold on to him if you own him. Make a little waiver bid on him if he's available on your waiver wire. I think he's a curious case for the rest of the year.
All right, and then last year, let's talk about Trey Benson. And Trey Benson is going to be more of a be careful with this one. Trey Benson had 8 carries for 37 yards, but he did score a touchdown. He also had a reception that was for 20 yards, so that was 3 extra points on his 12.5-point day. He still only played 28% of snaps. His highest was in week 2 against the Rams, where he played 33% of snaps, had 11 carries, and then the next game followed it up, played only 3% of the snaps, and only had 2 carries. And so I don't think by any means this is an indication that Trey Benson is going to continue to get a larger share of that work in the running back room for the Arizona Cardinals. What I do think this says about Trey Benson is I think at this point, if you were to see something happen to James Conner, I think he would be the next man up, and I think he would be extremely fantasy relevant. And so this is a James Conner that, again, has had a history of missing games and going down into the stretch with playoffs. I mean, you're talking about having open roster spots. I think that one of them, if you have extra roster spots that are just sitting there and Trey Benson's on waivers, I think you should absolutely have him on your roster because he is one injury away. And because he has shown some promise, he has gotten better as the season gone on.
He's a good running back.
4.6, and next year
that
he's
was
going to project.
Never in question.
Next year he's going to project really well, like really well. And so, I would be again. I probably wouldn't spend a ton on Trey Benson, if any at all. But I do think he's worth putting on your roster, just in case, and just for his upside, and just because he is actually starting to show some signs of development. And I think that, again, that offense is going to be in a situation for the rest of the year with their schedule where they are going to be probably trying to get in the playoffs. And that makes a big difference, right? And so if, again, he were to assume either a larger share of the work there, which I don't think is going to happen when James Conner is healthy, because James Conner is that good and they've proven that they will just run the crap out of James Conner, right? But if you know, he were to get more opportunity or step into a larger role, then he would be in a situation where you're talking about a pretty competitive offense in terms of their schedule the rest of the year and trying to win games. And so, again, not
a bad schedule either.
For running back especially. They play Carolina in week 16. They play the Rams in week 17, New England in week 15, Seattle in week 14. So, and then Minnesota in week 13 is tough. But again, that's before the playoffs for most leagues. So, be careful with that one, but that's just one I think if you got an empty roster spot, you take a shot on them. So there you go. Some guys to pick up off your waivers this week. It's honestly a bad week of waivers all around. That's why we're not going to recommend you drop very much money on any of these guys at all. Definitely better for wide receiver, though, and running back is just kind of a crap show at this point. So appreciate you guys. Make sure you drop a like and subscribe. So show some love if you appreciate the video, but we appreciate you guys, and we'll see you later.